Today, the webinar hosted by Formation Tech with our partners Versailles, Microsoft Team and Jabra. Today's session, we're going to be discussing some of the challenges and solutions to support users and IT teams in the remote and hybrid world. So previously, in our monthly Teams Learning webinars, we've spoken a lot around the technology for the hybrid office, so at the office end of the solution. Today, these three partners will share insights and solutions focused on the remote challenges of the hybrid working practice. Firstly, we have Microsoft, who lead little introduction, but we're talking about some of the use cases they have seen across their clients, alongside some new developments in Teams. Secondly, Versailles, who have provided enterprise-grade monitoring platforms for many years and who underpin much of our managed service. And finally, Jabra, who cater for the last leg between the service and the user with fully supported Teams headsets. This is as integral as any other part of the solution to providing good user experience in a hybrid world. So I guess firstly over to Tim at Microsoft. The rapid shift to supporting working from home has created all sorts of complexities. In the context of what we're here to talk about today, can you highlight some of the areas and kind of solutions that Microsoft is working on just now?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction there, Mark, and welcome to you all. We've seen massive change over the last couple of years in adoption of Teams as a platform. Just a statistic I'll share with you. In the UK, we've seen that over 40% of 6 to 60-year-olds use Teams on a daily basis. And that shows the level we as Microsoft have to be aware of how many people are reliant on our platform. And when we look at what's occurred within Microsoft around the Teams platform, the communication and collaboration, we've had a very strong focus on inclusivity for people regardless of their working location. If we look at the heavily overused term of hybrid working, it is quite literally something we've talked about for some time, but the ability to work at any time, in any place, on any device. And we've been seeing that, and through the adoption of Teams and how it's been utilized, we've just seen that going from strength to strength. There are obviously in the last 2 years a very strong focus from Microsoft on developing their capabilities and supporting the inclusivity of people to work on that platform. But we've also seen some issues in the speed with which people have moved onto a hybrid working platform and adopted and moved forward without setting the benchmarks, the caveats, the controls in place on that platform. Although Microsoft can't directly go back and retrospectively fix that for our customers, we're delivering and developing platforms to help customers get that under control and make the most optimum use of the platform.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And I guess over to you, Ian. I mean, to Tim's point, I think not only has the adoption been absolutely enormous, but the relative productivity and the relative success that businesses have seen in hybrid working has probably been beyond anything a lot of them could really have imagined 2 years ago. But to the point of this webinar today, there are still a lot of challenges to be addressed. A lot of users are feeling quite frustrated. From the size part, how are you addressing that, and how do you summarize that particular issue?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the call. The issue is, Mark, that the problems with UC performance is not normally inside a platform that's delivered, from Teams. We found that the most common causes affecting experience is actually not inside that environment, and so the data isn't necessarily presented itself in the Graph API. Research has shown that organizations impacted by such issues actually don't have the right management platforms and capabilities within their arsenal. Only 11% of organizations that would be impacted by outages have any platform or tool to utilize to help them identify issues. And only 7% of those organizations actually have a product that aligns itself to the Microsoft ecosystem. So to Tim's point, the hybrid working shift has happened quite rapidly. The environment we work in now is probably more complex than it was before. So there's more pieces of equipment, if you like, or components within the end-to-end interaction. So if we look at a call like today, for example, we could be generating up to 50,000 data points from this one interaction. And how do you have, as an organization, sort of full stack line of sight end-to-end? And I think that's where the frustration then is coming from, Mark.
Yeah, because we spoke recently about what the old world used to look like, where you'd have everyone in an office with internet connection that have enterprise grade local networking. And Versailles, amongst other businesses, have spent many years working on how you can monitor and manage that piece. And those users in that world would be, if everyone has an internet outage, everyone knows about it. If there's a quality issue, people tend to talk about it. So that is a very different way of working. So we talk about a lot of these data points and a lot of these various things. That can also impact the way IT teams look at this stuff as well as the user. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that, Ian?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, like Tim mentioned, that the speed at which the change happened was quite, phenomenal. We had the holy cow moment where Boris told us all that we had to work from home, and everybody did so at such pace, using, as you mentioned, consumer grade technology. So the internet connection that was only really for you to browse at home or stream video at home effectively then became integral to the business system. When you were in the office, the whole environment was fully managed by the IT team. Controls and security controls could be put around it. Now, almost 2/3 of the end-to-end solution is effectively what we call unmanaged. When you were in the office, if there was a fault, to your point, you generally knew about it, or you could wander around to the IT team to find out what the issue is. Now, how do you do that? How do you make an assumption? Is it me? Is it everybody? And what's happening? This has driven us ultimately to evolve ourselves, to your point around the introduction. We've been providing UC service management for a long time, but actually now it's more about being data-driven and providing data-driven insight, using that end-to-end line of sight all the way down to the end user's workstation at home, using our VSM Everywhere client, and then actually providing the ability for those home users to tell somebody they have an issue. So we've tapped into the feedback, the post-call survey in Teams, to give the user the ability to not only tell somebody that there is an issue, and then what we're doing is attaching a number of the data points we're collecting and getting that to the service desk, so that feedback actually goes to the right place to be dealt with correctly by the right people.
So the point at hand today really is fundamentally about user experience. It's about user well-being, and Microsoft have talked extensively about that. There's a lot of things they've done. You've seen the big events. You've seen continually talking about it, because fundamentally well-being flows through to everything else in the business. And in fact, this is really a big part where Jabra comes in. It's mentioned it a moment ago. It's the last mile, the last leg between the user and the device. But fundamentally, if that piece isn't really performing, there's a lot of frustrations can come into play. And I think, Nigel, do you want to maybe just give your pass on that and where you see the challenges and solutions?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. From live in my kitchen. I'm at a table in an open kitchen with light spewing in through the window. And it's an uncontrolled environment. So a lot of people just raced away from the office, were sent with whatever equipment they could get from the office, and then acquired generally from either the company sending it to them or just going on to Amazon and finding something to use. And a lot of frustration has built up on that. And it's also changed the way that people think. So, for example, the recent research we found is that 75% of people really enjoy working from home. It's the first thing. Or let's call it work from anywhere. 25% of people think that their companies aren't really ready for it. So they haven't got the right tools for the job. And now, of course, out there, we're seeing the first of the phenomena, which is called the talent war. And 59% of people who interviewed on this reckon that hybrid working is now top of their agenda above some of the traditional things like pay and development. So the world has changed dramatically, and it's clear that there's a frustration out there with users. Jabra's involved in that last yard, and of course the experience a person gets is very important. So, for example, the most obvious one is today I have a child at home, I have a dog, and I'm in the kitchen. Yeah, I use a very good noise cancelling headset to make sure that there's a concentration bubble around my head and that the noises around me are not disturbing the call. And that allows me to be productive because I am leading the conversation or taking part in the conversation, rather than using something that is perhaps consumer grade that allows lots of the noise to come in, and therefore you have to mute yourself and become passive in the call, and therefore you're not being particularly productive. So productivity is all down to the right tools for the job, but it also goes to the well-being of the individual, because they will feel as if they're valued by their company if they've got the right tools to do the job. And it's great to have the platforms like Versailles and, of course, Microsoft Teams, which allows all this communication. But that last yard becomes vitally important in that personal well-being. And it makes a big difference, I think, to have the right tools to do the job.
Yeah, and in the context of today, I mean, obviously, Versailles are integral part of what we're here to talk about today. You know, the Jabra integration into Versailles platform. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about how that helps the user alongside the IT department, and I guess fundamentally both the customer experience and the user experience? To you, Nigel. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's probably Ian can explain it a little better for me, but one of the most important things is to get the actual information that things are happening and that people are frustrated. So, for example, it is a great difference that I, for example, have to call the IT department. I can't walk across the room to go and explain that I've got a problem. And so having the data point to a recorder that something is happening is vitally important. And the work that we've done with Versailles is to actually try and capture this information so that it's displayed real time for people to make real decisions upon it. And I think that's the major part. But Ian, perhaps you can explain it deeper.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Yeah, Mark, to your point around the Jabra integration, and we've absolutely looked at that last foot, if you like. So, you know, it's great assuming that my internet connectivity is good and my machine is performing. But to Nigel's point, you know, if this thing on my head that I'm using to really handle the interaction is poorly performing, then ultimately myself as an agent working from home, you know, a very expensive resource for many organizations, you know, we've seen that 70% of agents are negatively affected by background noise. So tapping into some of that rich data that it's available, we focus primarily on sort of two key areas. One is, I suppose, what you would traditionally call the asset information. So what model is the headset? What software version is it? You know, where is it? We all generally, most people probably on this call in IT, and we know sometimes something as simple as being on the right version can make sure that we're working at optimum levels, but also trying to understand how people are utilizing things like the volume button or the mute button. You know, we can see things like how many times a mute or volume button was pressed in a single call. So if you've got a person working from home who's constantly turning up the volume, to Nigel's point, does that mean there's too much background interference? Are they putting the audio levels above the World Health Organization's recommended levels? Getting that information to the service desk or to the IT team, or in fact to the people team, you know, who are responsible for people well-being. What is affecting that user's experience, and how can we help them? And it may not be a technical scenario, but having that data, getting that to the right people within the organization to help them, we're finding is really mission critical on understanding the well-being of the user.
There's a term in Microsoft, we say better together. It's not necessarily that the teams will cover all of the noise cancellation. And this is where things like Nigel was telling us about his sound cancellation. It's the best of all the products together. Now, we do expect an update coming to Teams noise cancelling in the April 2022 update, which will include prevention of cancellation of certain sounds. However, it's the last mile. It's the environment you work in. We can't help where we're working, and sometimes the headset is going to be, you know, your last line of defence for a better expression on that.
And yeah, just chiming in there on that one for Tim. With our latest series of headsets, which is the Evolve 2 that I'm wearing today, for example, we adopt the Microsoft Open Office standard, which means that to have the boom arm close to the face and have ultra noise cancelling is the highest standard that you can have inside an office, and it enhances the experience with Teams, and that's the whole point of it, to pick up Tim's point there. And it becomes actually one of the biggest sources of interruptions that you get on a daily basis. In the office, it was always reckoned that if you were interrupted by somebody else, it would take you about 23 minutes to meander back to the task you were doing. At home, it's a little bit quicker, but still it can destroy a call, you know, and it's still the biggest source of frustration for users is home interruptions, or working from anywhere. For example, it could be the coffee machine at Starbucks is too noisy.
So the original sort of theme of this webinar today I think the statistic was 86% of users are suffering in silence, which means that the remaining 24% are probably making a disproportionate amount of noise to their service desk. So, you know, given that you have these 86% of users that are effectively out there having various problems, from headset issues to internet issues to Wi-Fi issues. I mean, Tim, I know that Microsoft, we spoke in the introduction about well-being and the various things in which you've looked at, and there's also the people element to this, because it's not just about stats and data, it's about how people interact and giving people options and ability to do that. And obviously Ian mentioned the Graph API a moment ago. Do you want to maybe expand a little bit on that, Tim, in the context of what we're here to talk about?
Yeah, it's quite funny for a company like Microsoft, which you would consider to be technically driven, has a front and center at its core, diversity and inclusion, and some of that then spins off into the well-being of the individual and where they are in the individual situation. We know when people moved out of the office and they sat at home, the only conversations they had were premeditated, pre-booked, planned, and very much like this. You only spoke to someone when you had a slot to talk to them, whereas in the office you could see physical body slumps, you could see people's behaviors. Now, a lot of what Microsoft has been working on, and you may have heard of the platform Viva, which is an add-on to Teams, which looks at human insight. It looks at, do you delay this message to be sent at a time when it's that person's time zone? And I have this problem all the time talking to people in Seattle. I'll send an email at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They'll say, yeah, do you want to delay that for a couple of hours? It's not about my well-being they're looking after. They're looking after the well-being of the person I'm sending the email to. So it doesn't turn up at 6 o'clock in the morning in their inbox. But it also, I get a weekly report of how many emails or chats I've been looking at outside my normal working hours. As an individual, I can look at that and I can act upon that and realize, what I'm doing here isn't really the best for my health and well-being. But all of these tools tie up and all this data ties up to giving you a view, admittedly in a data perspective, but a view and an understanding of how your workforce are feeling. But you also need to give the workforce the opportunity to feed back onto this as well.
And that's really interesting. And when we look at this solution, and this, we look at it from an MSP point of view, how can we help our customers to kind of address these issues with their user base? And it is about understanding that wider picture. And it's the problems a lot of businesses have right now in Ian mentioned it earlier around consumer grade internets. It's maybe half term and your kids are on PlayStations and such like. So a lot of this is about elevating that experience and understanding how things are to address it. Because if people aren't raising it and complaining about it, you don't necessarily know what's going on. So I mean, Ian, back to Versailles and we talked a little about AI and how we can kind of learn a lot of the consolidation of these data points to kind of raise these issues. Do you want to maybe kind of touch upon that before we perhaps move back onto that term?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's about taking, to your point, all of the data that we're able to capture. Being cloud native, run on the Azure environment gives us almost unlimited capability in terms of that real-time data we can capture and then historically process and provide. It does also mean we can use some of the adaptive AI and machine learning capability that's also natively there. So looking at trends in terms of, to Tim's point, you're looking at that Viva data. What is a normal interaction? What is normal for this particular user? And can we spot any anomalies for that? So can we see that actually, using some of that data, Tim's generally on calls or video chats. His actual experience is generally pretty good. Within, I suppose, industry standard of acceptable levels, and then how we can utilize that data to get that information to the right place. So we're looking continually now about how we can evolve and take more of that wellbeing data from people like Microsoft using Viva, which is available still inside the Graph API, and then attaching that. So to your point, it's not just about bits and bytes. It's about how that is all really affecting the experience. So we're pulling, technical analytics. So, traditional SIP, SBC capability, how is that affecting the environment, that sort of Teams XCAS layer, pulling that in. So what can the platform that's hosting the interaction see, and then going all the way down to that end user environment. So, is there contention on the end user's workstation, and then that last foot. So taking again that data from Jabra. So for us, it's about full end-to-end line of sight. So full stack analytics is what you need now. And then, as Tim mentioned earlier about the noise cancellation coming in April, the software organizations we're working with are continually providing more rich data to us. And what we will continually do over time is take that data and then impart that into the data that we provide, which enables then the operations to give a better experience to their employees.
Yeah, and something that's really well for Formation Tech actually is the star rating at the end of the call. I mean, I used to find it a little bit frustrating at the end of every call to have to kind of rate it, but actually when you realize what it does, it's not just going up to the sort of mothership of Microsoft. It actually goes through, integrates. If it aligns it with a certain call with a certain problem, it can raise a ticket. And it might be just an ad hoc problem, but fundamentally, amongst all the data, when you've got maybe hundreds of employees or you've got lots of different data points, if you're reviewing this on a monthly or weekly basis, it really gives you that kind of opportunity to kind of raise in. So we talked about the Graph API a little bit earlier. I mean, Tim, from your perspective, the integration with Versailles and the various bits and pieces that they've developed around that. Do you want to maybe go into that a little bit further?
I'll leave Ian to cover the Versailles bit, but what we offer from Microsoft is a plethora of data that can be analysed, assumed. Some of this is available on the Teams platform, but to get real value out of it, you need to take data from multiple sources. And as Ian was saying earlier on about the information from Nigel, but also this all comes back to ultimately it's about a person and their well-being. It's not just about, Ian, you use the term bits and bytes. It's about creating a picture and an understanding and a trend to show what the environment is for the person. We do have the Graph API, which allows some great automation and APIs to create, applications that can further utilize Teams. But the net result is in the back end, there is just a plethora of data that allows you to model and understand. And the point is to understand what your users are going through and to make it about the user, the person, the individual, but also given a view of a theme and a concept of how people are operating on that platform.
Yeah, that's very interesting actually, and I think again some of the conversations we've had in the round here is going back to where we see this from an MSP point of view is that ability to also see the Graph API, to get views of what's happening on the local level from bandwidth, from Wi-Fi, from troubleshooting. Because right now, talking to a number of our customers, IT teams just are really scrabbling around to see what's going on, and when a ticket gets raised, it's a bit of a needle in a haystack, really. It's kind of we've got a poor quality call, we've got an audio issue, we've got a problem, and it's like, where do I start looking? Maybe 6 or 7 different platforms. So I think the Jabra integration that we have right now that we've talked about into Versailles and the various bits and pieces that that we can get the information, it just allows our IT teams that we work with to be that much more efficient and integrating into ITSM. So I mean, but back to Ian at Versailles. I mean, in terms of where you sort of see this progressing, like and the benefits and the sort of wins you've seen with the platform. Do you want to maybe go into that a little bit further?
Yeah, from a use case point of view, to kind of echo some of your comments there. I mean, we're able to see things like, somebody might leave a post-call survey, 2 stars. I had a poor experience. Using multiple, all those multiple data points we mentioned, we can look at things like were jitter and packet loss above or below Microsoft's recommended standards, because we're able to get that data and analyze that and check if it's in line with those recommendations. We can see almost like the obvious thing, but you might have somebody who constantly complains that their experience is poor. We can tell you, well, actually, it's probably because they're not on a wired connection at home. They're constantly on their Wi-Fi. Or actually, it looks like they were connected to the Starbucks free Wi-Fi. Actually, when they processed that call, we've identified maybe that's a security issue because they're on an unsecure network. But actually, this individual that's complaining, it's because they're not operating within the best, environment to make a conducive call. And we've all been there where, somebody perhaps wants a bit of work avoidance. My experience is bad, therefore I can no longer process today's interactions. Well, actually, it doesn't even look like you're at home. So having that useful information is critical. But I think to your point around the IT teams, we've also got to give everybody the platform to be able to understand how to create a seamless experience. I mean, Nigel mentioned it earlier. We talk about work from home, but actually it's work from anywhere, and anywhere can also be the office. So, we're us 4 presented here, all in different locations, all using video. This is now kind of commonplace. I go back to the office and I'm going to now join a Teams call with some of my colleagues. Some may be in the office, some may be at home, some may be international. And I'm going to adopt this same experience and I'm going to have my video turned on. But I'm in an office environment that actually was probably built and configured when generally most people would have used audio only. If you were using video, you would have been in a controlled environment, in a meeting room with a single video conferencing environment. So there's lots of these complexities now about how do you give me as my user, as the user, a seamless experience when I'm working from anywhere. So it's about understanding the challenges working remotely, and we're able to use the same intelligence to help you when you're working in the core office environment.
Yeah, and over to you briefly now. Just sorry, Tim, were you about to interject there?
I was just going to say, it's one of the things is it's about this level playing field. You know, we said at the start of the call about any time, any place, anywhere. For those old enough to know it, I would call that the Martini Model. It's the fact that regardless of where you are, everyone has the same seat at the table. If 5 of you, pre-pandemic, 20 of us would be in a meeting room and one person would be on a mobile phone in a car driving down the road on mute because they couldn't be heard. And if they did unmute, they overrode the entire conversation. We don't want to be back in that situation. If you are that person in that car, that person at home, you all have to be on an equal playing field. You all have to have the same opportunity to talk, to interact, and to create value in that meeting. And this is one of the real core drivers behind a lot of development that's been going on into teams is to understand that, as Ian said, if you're going to be in the office or you're going to be at home, you're still going to adopt the same way of working because it's become so synonymous with working. Hybrid working is about in the office, out the office. And, we've all worked in airport lounges, on the train, and we know the levels of connectivity available. And being of a technical background, we quite often understand the limitations. Not everyone does. So a lot of what Ian said to me makes sense to the users who are there to do their day job, and that may not be IT. Their job is something completely different, but they rely on a technology that's given to them. They won't always understand the impact of using a Starbucks Wi-Fi or trying to use a 4G video call while driving down the road. This is why we need to help them. We need to have that data to understand when they're in this situation. And that's, again, driving back into this, helping people be put on a level playing field where they're all equal, all fairly represented within the same environment. Sorry that I took away there, Mark. It was just something I wanted to share.
It still connects to the point I was going to make, actually, because I think a lot of the narrative in this last couple of years, we talk about hybrid working, but a lot of people are still working pretty much remote, or at least it's more majority remote than office. A lot of the webinars we focused on for our team's monthly webinars have been around getting the infrastructure ready, whether it's teams meeting rooms, whether it's getting the network right, getting the monitoring right. But I was going to hand to Nigel and say, look, we talked about the dog barking, we talked about the kids at home, but actually to Tim's point about equivalence, headsets are as important in the office as they are remotely, because you have different challenges. Do you want to maybe just quickly touch upon some of those and how Jabra have maybe sort of addressed those issues?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Mark. When I first arrived at Jabra 8 years ago, I was remarked on the fact that there were no telephones on the desk. It's a company that's always lived in the cloud. It's always lived and sort of sold its own story. And the story really is about this work is no longer the place you go, it's what you do. And that actually is the driver behind all of this. The technology's always been there. The pandemic put the light bulb on for everybody and says that you could actually collaborate. And what it's actually done as well is exploded collaboration. As Tim's statistics show, the explosion is all over the place, from the young to the old. And what that's really done is that it's reevaluating all the work from home and the work at the office, because now people are talking about constricting the offices a little bit because more people are going to be out of the office. Therefore, how do you reconfigure the office? Because the biggest danger you've got is you're going to create noise in the office as there's more people in less space. So you need to have something that actually is fit for purpose and it can be carried home and into the office. So ultra noise cancelling is absolutely critical to meet the team standards of the open office. Is the first big thing. The second thing is that for the video experience, no longer the rooms now, these big multi-100,000-pound rooms of huge telepresence. We're going to be seeing an explosion of smaller, purpose-made rooms that fit the kind of level of meetings that were being done on the web as we have experienced right now. So meeting rooms are going to be smaller, more numerous, and they're going to have to be fit for purpose in terms of having all of the space available. So our 180-degree camera comes into play here. And then you have to have the quality noise cancellation to go with it, because there's going to be probably thinner walls as well. When you put this all together, you need a solution that's going to optimize that space, because what you don't want to do is to build too few meeting rooms or too many. So things like our people count in the camera can be integrated into technology like Versailles, although it's not just yet done yet, that'll probably be the next step, where you can utilize that information and optimize your space and meeting rooms to make sure that you're getting value for money and get the best user experience. So the world is actually going to, as Tim describes it, everybody is going to be equal everywhere. And in order to do that, you have to have the right tools to do the job and the right technology to monitor how it's doing for the users.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There was a question here around Teams rooms, which I don't know if you'd seen, Nigel. You broadly covered that, and in fact, Tim's kindly shared also an interesting article here around 5 ways Microsoft Teams has transformed Microsoft, and that there's some quite interesting parts of that actually. And it's the user experience, the equivalence. If I was to answer that question, I think it's about maintaining user experience, whether you are working at home, working in the office, in the meeting room, or the meeting space. To your point, Nigel, maintaining that experience, that the user just knows how it works. It's not about saying, well, what cable does this do? And it just goes in and it works. It's a really important thing. And that there's a big point right now about technology is not giving people reasons not to come back to the office. It's quite comfortable remote working. Productivity, it's been a success. There's lots of things that's lost, from collaboration to innovation, and that there's things that being together you just can't replicate in a fully remote world. So giving people reasons not to come back to the office, all this sort of plays into that, so that businesses can ultimately move to that next stage, hybrid. And I think the businesses that get that right are going to be the ones that really succeed. Yeah. So we're just about at our half an hour now. We've obviously got a little bit longer, but I think just to summarize today, it's been a really interesting conversation with 3 key players in this space. We've previously talked, as I said, a lot about the technology for the office in the hybrid space, and this is really about bringing it all together so that you can understand how your users are performing wherever they are. It isn't just about the remote part. It's not just about the office, but fundamentally in the unmanaged world that Ian so articulately spoke about. We've gone from a place where we understood what everything was doing on a day-to-day basis because it's enterprise grade, to now a place where everyone's working well, everyone's kind of getting on with things, but they just don't really let you know when it's not working very well. And so a lot of what today's covered has been really interesting. How the Versailles platform was developed, how Jabra integrated to it alongside Teams. And as a follow-up to this, we're going to continue to run our Formation Tech monthly webinars, so please do come and join those. And there will be a follow-up webinar as well if you want a bit of a deep dive to understand how the platform works, to have a look at the sort of bits and bytes and understand that side of things, to understand how you might bring it into your customers if you're an MSP on this call, or for your business if you're looking at how your users are performing and how their well-being is being looked after. So thank you very much for everyone who's joined, and thank you to Tim, Ian and Nigel for all the contributions today. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for the opportunity, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
At all.